And I'm speaking to Armando Troisi from BioWare. Tell me a little bit about your role there and what you do.
I'm the lead cinematic designer on the Mass Effect franchise, which basically means I oversee a team of programmers, designers, and artists. Production and QA is also implementing interactive cinematics into our games.
So you've come a long way since being a graduate of the VFS game design program. Tell me about how your role changed when you first arrived there and how it's evolved to what you're doing now.
Well, it was really interesting because when I first arrived at BioWare, cinematic design didn't actually exist. Really, it was all about trying to figure out how we were going to build this game and all the different challenges around content and trying to make this interactive experience awesome. So we did a lot of learning. I think we started with about 4 people, and I think all our studios together now have about 32 or 33 cinematic designers. So we've seen a really great growth in the discipline of cinematic design at BioWare and in other studios as well.
So as part of your talk today, you talked about interactive design of narrative, and that's different than just a typical cutscene. Tell me a little bit about what your presentation was about and that area of focus that you've had in the Mass Effect series.
It was the idea of how do we interface interactivity and narrative together, and how do we make that an experience? So it's how do we bring game design fundamentals and how do we bring game design know-how into the cinematic space? The idea of choice is a huge part of what BioWare does and something we take very seriously.
What did you do to try to evolve that as far as cinematics and presentation goes with Mass Effect 2?
When we first started Mass Effect 1, we had a daunting amount of content to get through, and we had really no idea of how we were going to get through it. So we were kind of developing the tools and the process of cinematic design while we were developing the game. So what we found out is that there's really 2 different kinds of schools when it comes to this type of content. There's the procedural and then there's the handcrafted. And with Mass Effect, we had to lean toward more of the procedural generation. So the game design aspect of that was designing the systems that allowed us to say, oh, this character's angry. And really that allowed us to touch maybe about 50% of the content in Mass Effect 1 and make 50% really unique, and the rest is kind of like this procedurally generated content. So for Mass Effect 2, we kind of said, okay, procedural stuff is not going to work for us. We want this very high-end cinematic experience. It has to be handcrafted. So we came up with this idea, what we call the Hand of God. And the Hand of God means that it has to go through an artist's hands. There has to be a finishing touch by a human in order to make it an emotional experience. So we took those procedural systems and we moved them to the back end, where it got us 80% of the way there, so we only had to do 20% of the work to make it really, really awesome. But everything was touched. So everything in Mass Effect 2 was a hand-touched experience, which gave us that great cinematic and emotional feel that we were looking for.
You're a grad of the game design program, right?
I am.
Tell us a little bit about your experience and how that got you where you ended up.
Oh, wow. It was a really mind-opening experience for me in terms of like what is possible creatively. Because really I felt that my whole forte into film and television and sound was all about trying to be a good storyteller. And I think games allowed me to do that. So when I went through the program, I really had a focus on storytelling, and which ultimately led me to falling into this job. So VFS was really instrumental in me being successful today.
So if there's one piece of advice that you could give to an aspiring designer, somebody like yourself several years ago, what would that piece of advice be? Know
your craft, really. I think it's all about getting involved. It's not and the analogy I always use is, if you want to be a painter, if you want to be a great painter, you got to pick up a paintbrush. And if you don't pick up a paintbrush, then you'll never be a great painter. And you can talk about being a great painter all you want. And people who want to get into the game industry, they always give me the same question, what should I do? Pick up a game that has a game engine and start modding it and go online and collaborate and work with groups and social networks and build things and fail. And I think failure is a great learning tool. So you have to go through some of those trials and tribulations. And if you don't, then you're not really making headway or progress.
Thank you very much for taking the time, and thank you for being a part of the Game Design Expo 2010.
No, thank you for having me.